Welcome back to Cards and Comics, guys. Today I want to talk about something a little different from me and my channel. I'm not showing 90s cards. I'm not showing some of my collection. What I want to talk about is hoarding versus collecting and my personal experience, because there is times when collecting can get intense. You accumulate a lot of things, and there becomes sort of a stress about the accumulation, the size, the storage, the organization of a collection, to where it becomes not fun to have that much material anymore, because it's more stressful to see it because it's unorganized. You don't feel like it's makes sense. And I personally made the decision to downsize some of my collection. I talked about it, to focus on other parts of my collection, but really it's to, have less stuff to organize and try to make sense of. So we'll talk about collecting, we'll talk about hoarding, and I'll give some examples and kind of what started me off on this topic now. I saw this on the Jeff Wilson, I think, short. Um, he had this thing about the world's largest collection of sports cards. And, you know, when I see this, when I saw this, image, I didn't think, wow, that's cool. What I thought was, oh my God, I would be stressed to my out of my mind if this was my stuff. Because, it's just so massive, so much stuff that, it's impossible to know, like, in 20 million cards, what you really have, right? And trying to catalog it. And I'm certain, you know, 80 for the 20, right? But I'll go into detail because this photo is really telling. And again, if you click through this slideshow, you can see some different things here. But I just want to point out some things in the photo. One thing is, um, right up front is a bunch of NASCAR cards and race cards. I'm not picking on those collectors. I'm just saying those cards are really not worth anything for the most part. So, when I looked into this collection, if you look back further, I guess on the viewing screen to the left, you'll see a ton of like 88, 89 score factory sets. I think there's 90 upper deck back there. There's a bunch of tops sets that are pretty much worthless. So in this collection of millions of cards, and this is something that's, as a collector versus a hoarder, is that at some point you have to kind of realize or know when it's just not worth keeping. And I look at this collection, if I look at this other photo here, these brown boxes, right? I've collected, since the 80s as well. These dusty, dirty brown boxes with these complete sets or random sort of cards. Eventually, they're not worth keeping. They're what hoarders do, right? They think there's something valuable in there. We'll get into some definitions in a minute. But just seeing this makes me cringe, and it's not cool. I think to celebrate this, or to celebrate someone who accumulated 20 million cards, if someone came to me and said, I have 20 million sports cards, and they were cards like this, I would immediately think they have an issue. They might have a problem. That this isn't like someone who might be fully healthy in how and what they're doing. Right? This isn't an activity that normal people typically do, to accumulate this much cards, especially the majority of this. I'm going to just say, by looking at it, is probably not worth storing, keeping, putting any sort of effort or money into it to try to determine, what to do with it, right? If the 20 million cards, a high percentage of them, based on the photos that are shown here, are probably not worth messing with and dealing with. Now, there's some other photos here of some very cool stuff, and graded cards like this. So again, there are, I'm sure, amazing cards in this collection, but when you see these photos like this and like this, it looks more like someone who was a hoarder than a collector. And from my personal experience, and the things I've been doing is trying to downsize a little bit, is because you lose control of it. You lose control of being able to catalog, know, find stuff. It just becomes like a burden. All this stuff just kind of pressing in on you, and you don't know what to do with it. I'm just going to tell you that having this much stuff, it, I know someone purchased it. That's the whole point of the story. But in general, they purchase it just for the good stuff. A lot of the stuff is probably going to be thrown away. Now, is this unique to this one individual? Well, not really. If you Google or search on YouTube for world's largest collection, you'll see, like this story from 6 years ago. This guy was, 3 million baseball cards. And if you look at, some of the clips here and some of the photos, a lot of these cards, again, he shows some vintage cards, but he shows tons and tons of commons, tons of cards that are just not really worth anything. And that's the thing, is like you've got, um, people like this, and then there's another one down here of someone else with, millions of baseball cards again. And if you look at the photo, I mean, again, those boxes after boxes after boxes of cards contain tons of commons that just aren't worth dealing with or having. And unfortunately, for the most part, especially going into the 80s and 90s, complete sets just aren't worth anything. They're not even worth probably having hardly anymore, because no one really collects complete sets anymore. So if you show up, with your 87 Fleer baseball set, only 2 or 3 cards in that set people even care about. And so, having the full set does nothing to the value. They just want those 2 or 3 cards. Everything else is just going to get pitched. And that's just the sad truth, is that a majority of these cards were, that people have, we're seeing these videos, were mass produced, mass printed, really not hard to find. And only a few cards in any of these sets that are being shown here, like in this picture here, are worth anything, right? And again, this photo and this photo, literally probably almost the same type of cards, same type of collection. Now let's talk about the difference between a collector and a hoarder, right? So the International OCD Foundation has this great little chart here to talk about the difference between hoarding and collecting and clutter. Um, and so let's look at the definition they have on hoarding. Items do not have a specific theme, and usually many different types of items. They're acquired in a non-planned fashion. Acquisition is often excessive. And a lot of the items were free or just given away. And if you look at what a lot of these collections are from the 90s, right? And I talked to a lot of guys who have had these really big collections. I've been to, let's say auction houses, like small local auctions where people bring in these, massive collections. And you talk to these guys, and it's like, where did you get all these cards? And it's like, well, I would go to yard sales. I would go to, like people would tell me they were going to throw away all this stuff in their basement, and there was cards in there, so I went and grabbed them. It's like they were going around and just kind of like amassing all these cards without any real idea of what to acquire in terms of any sort of value. But they were just acquiring cards because they felt like the cards themselves had some kind of intrinsic value, just because they were a card. And that's when you get into that, how kind of many different items. And you see in most of these collections and most of these photos, there's balls and bats and there's other stuff. So it's just like, majority of these people aren't just collecting, baseball cards. They're collecting anything related to the hobby, baseball, or sports in general. So in the end, when I go, I've had family members reach out to me. I've had people know I collect baseball cards, and invariably when I go to their houses or they give me their stuff, they don't just have, cards. They have posters. They have ceramic plates. They've got porcelain dishes or porcelain figures, or they've got all these different things, coins, Danbury mint stuff. I mean, just everything that was mass produced that people just accumulated and hoarded because they thought it was going to have some value, and then eventually they just have so much of it. And they're and again, we all heard the story. People are disappointed to know that that stuff isn't worth anything. um you know the other side of it too is this the home being cluttered. The photos that you just saw were people were still pretty organized, right? If you think about the massive footprint these collections take up, and even in my house where I'm in the basement, it's just like as it grows and you've got a family, and it's like, should I be taking up a third of the basement with sports cards and comic books? You know, should I rent, another space and pay money that could be spent on something else? Like these things become real decisions when you become older and you kind of have more responsibilities. And I think it becomes more of a challenge the bigger it gets, because it starts to get to the point where it becomes like a living organism that kind of has things you have to feed it, you have to keep it going. There's also a side of it too, is if you quit collecting, you quit growing it, it's like you admit that you were wrong. And this is something I've talked to, to a lot of these kind of collectors is, why'd you keep buying more stuff? And why'd you, and they're like, well, I already had a bunch, so I just felt like I should just keep going. Or it felt like the other stuff just didn't have a purpose anymore. And that is, when you read about people who are hoarders, is that the accumulation of stuff is to make somewhat sense of the stuff you already had. It isn't like you're trying to accumulate more stuff because you have a goal in mind. It's just getting more stuff is the goal. Um, and getting rid of stuff. And I think both collectors and hoarders have the same problem. Is in fact, when I announced or talked about selling some vintage cards to buy 90s cards and to buy pre-war cards, I got some negative feedback. I had people reach out to me being like, that's dumb. Vintage cards will never lose value. You're going into a speculative market with the 90s cards. Like it's a bubble, it's going to burst. And but I think, well, when I was listening to people and talking to people, they were projecting onto me some of their own fears of like how they would feel if they were trying to get rid of cards they cared a lot about, which a lot of people care about vintage cards. Like to them, that is the safe, mature part of the market. And someone getting rid of that kind of challenges their own viewpoint on what they're collecting, and should they be hoarding those kind of cards or collecting those kind of cards. So again, getting rid of that kind of material, even if you watch someone else do it, sometimes it's stressful. It's like watching someone sell a card, and I've seen a lot of videos of people like watching someone make a trade or sell a card that they're like, "Why would you ever get rid of that? That's so dumb." Like, and it's like your own projection, because you're like, "I can't imagine ever doing that. I would be so stressed out, doing that." And it is stressful to get rid of some of your collection. Everyone has gone through it who's ever been a collector, especially if you flip collectibles collections to buy others. You always at some point regret making that decision. There's going to be a point when you say, man, I wish I hadn't got rid of X back then because X is worth this, or it's hard to replace, or whatever. And that's the thing, is like, both collectors and hoarders have a hard time letting go. um, there's this thing called normal collecting or normal clutter. um, and I think it's just kind of like an in-between collecting discussion. But I want to go to collecting. Items sit around a specific theme, and it doesn't vary as much. And I do think, the people who are hoarders of sports cards tend to, like I talked about other stuff, related to sports. But as I've walked into those houses, walked into the families, people that know me, you'll find out if they're a hoarder, the signs are pretty obvious, because it's not just sports cards, right? They'll have everything, and tons of everything, not just sports cards, right? Sports cards are just something that they think they can maybe make money on, right, at some point in the future, right? Or something that they know has some value. But hoarders generally collect, or not collect, but accumulate lots of things, right? Whereas collectors, and I think the collectors I've always admired are the ones that are like laser focused, right? You walk in and it's like one player, it's one set, it's Like they're very they are very focused on what they're collecting, right? And they're picky a little bit, about condition. And so there's a lot of things with collecting that you can say, like, that hoarder, like I was talking about before, is it's free. It's at a yard sale. It's like given away to them. Are they really caring about the condition? Are they really being like, well, those $89 commons that you have, they're not in mint shape, so I really can't use them. No, they're just like, give me more stuff, right? And that's where you can start seeing those differences, right? Um, again, people plan the searches, they save money, the purchases are planned, they know kind of a budget. I mean, there's a lot of things with collecting. Displaying how their collection is displayed is very important to them. So a lot of things about collecting are very important to them. A lot of things that people who are very focused and how they display and how things should look. And again, when you walk downstairs, I think this is the big aha moment for me was when I walked in to my collecting area, where I'm at right now. I started to get stressed out, like piles and piles of cards, comic books I haven't sorted in over a year, boxes of cards I haven't gone through or even looked at in multiple years. And I started to realize I've got to start moving stuff. So I have been selling boxes of cards, commons, or not commons, but like, minor stars, things I pulled, open packs, pull cards, put them aside, just get rid of it. Just, I don't care if I'm making, the value. I just want to get those boxes gone. My goal is to reform my collecting area, to put in more showcases, more racks I can display things. I want to see my cards. I talked about um, buying 90s cards in raw condition so I can put them in the top loader binder so I can flip through my collection and see the cards and enjoy them. For years my collection has just been in boxes or somewhat displayed behind me, but a very limited amount of cards. I don't see all the cool stuff I love on walls because I just don't have the space. I don't have the kind of walls. I got cement walls, so it's harder to display. So I want to change my area, but to do that, I got to downsize, and so I don't get as much pleasure as I could because of partly how I've collected too much stuff. That's getting into the hoarding side, but it's just, I've got to, figure out a way to make it more fun and pleasurable and easy for me to collect, because then, versus like a hoarder, which I know, is a psychological disorder, but, for the family of the hoarders, it hurts them too. And I don't want my collection to be a burden to someone, but I also don't want people to walk into my collecting space and be like, oh my god, like this guy, what's he doing? Like, there is stuff everywhere and it's so disorganized, and he's got hats and bats and guitars, and what's this guy doing? I want it to come in and people go like, oh my god, that's so cool, look at those things, look at that thing, and that thing is so cool, and I can't believe he has that cool thing, right? That is kind of the reaction I want, and that's not what I'm getting. So, as I kind of like in this thing, and just want to really just have this like final moment with you guys is, you know it's okay to downsize, it's okay to organize, it's okay to not get new things, and to organize your old things. Those are things are healthy part of collecting. And being a collector doesn't mean that you have to always be buying or always be absorbing things into your collection. Part of collecting is organizing, sorting, planning. All those things are part of it. So I think we spend so much time talking about new stuff, the things we just got, that we never, talk about or spend much time with the stuff that we already have. And so I think that is what I'm also kind of focusing on is, every new thing I want to come into my collection, I want it to have a spot, somewhere it fits. It goes into this binder, it goes into this box. So that box is sorted, and there's a spot for that card in that box. It fills a need. It fills a spot in my collection. And I think that is something that we have to, you know, for me anyway, that makes me feel good. Like, oh, my binder sets I'm working on. When I put that card in that binder in that slot, it's like, wow, I'm closer. I'm closer to having something done. I've accomplished something, right? It feels good. I mean, it's just that little thing, right? Versus like I just got something and it's going to go in a box somewhere. And it doesn't really fulfill any purpose other than just I got something new. Um, and that's I'm hoping it becomes less and less. So, but in the end, the goal is to be, again, more organized. But for everything that I purchase or buy has some sort of, it's a cool thing. I like the thing, but it fills a spot in my collection, or there's some part of my collection that has a little like a placeholder waiting for it to come into, right? So that's kind of the future goal. So let me know what you guys think. I mean, have you experienced that stress of having too much stuff, feeling like you're hoarding versus collecting? Or is it just a pretty unique experience where only a few people in the hobby have it? I think it's a lot more common than we think, but let me know your experience, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.